The rain slammed against the windshield like the world itself had turned its back. Rachel stood in the driveway, soaked, holding her daughter's stuffed animal in one hand and a box of her husband's memories in the other. Behind her, the front door slammed shut. Dorothy Carter stood in the glow of the porch light, arms crossed, her voice like ice. "You were never family, Rachel. This house belongs to the Carters now." The twins, Lily and Logan, pressed their faces against the fogged window of the old Honda. "Mommy, why is Grandma throwing our toys in the mud?" And that was it. Not the funeral, not the lawyers. That question broke her. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change, because there was one soul left who still remembered the truth. A blind dog named Bear. And he was about to lead them back to everything they had lost. The late autumn wind scraped down the coast of Havenwood, Oregon, like sandpaper over glass. A thin drizzle fell from a bruised gray sky, turning the cobblestone driveway of the Carter family estate into a slush of mud and fallen pine needles. The scent of rain, wet stone, and decaying leaves hung in the air. From the edge of the property, a small trail of tire marks curved out onto the fog-wrapped road, fading quickly into the mist. Rachel Carter stood by the rear of her old silver SUV, the liftgate propped open and boxes stacked haphazardly in the trunk. She was 28, tall and slim, her frame too slight for the burdens she carried. Her long, ash-blonde hair, once glossy and styled with effort, now fell in a frizzy, damp ponytail. The black dress she wore from the funeral 3 days ago still clung to her, crumpled and speckled with rain. Rachel had the tired beauty of someone who had not slept in days, graceful features worn by grief and sleepless nights. Her pale green eyes stayed dry somehow. She was not the kind of woman to cry where others could see. Grief had taught her silence, and betrayal had taught her steel. Behind her in the back seat sat two small figures, her 4-year-old twins, Lily and Logan. Lily pressed her hand against the rain-speckled window, her breath fogging the glass. Her curly auburn hair framed a heart-shaped face, wide-eyed and pink-cheeked. Logan sat next to her, quiet as ever, his arms wrapped tightly around a plush stuffed rabbit. He had his father's wavy brown hair and Rachel's chin, but his eyes, deep blue and glassy, had always looked like they were waiting for something just beyond what anyone could see. "Mommy?" Lily's voice cracked, muffled through the window. "Why are Grandma and Grandpa throwing our toys in the mud?" Rachel didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mouth opened, but the words curled back into her throat like wilted petals. At the doorway of the mansion stood Dorothy Carter, her late husband's mother, dressed in a camel-colored wool coat that looked more expensive than the entire SUV Rachel now loaded with what remained of her life. Dorothy was in her mid-60s, a woman whose once classic beauty had hardened with age and privilege. Her lips were thin, always painted the same blood red, her blonde bob immaculate. Dorothy looked down her nose at Rachel with a permanent air of quiet disdain, like someone smelling something just past its expiration date. "I gave you 1 hour, Rachel," Dorothy called out sharply, sipping from a porcelain mug of tea. "It's been 90 minutes. This isn't your home anymore. You're trespassing." Rachel turned, her voice low but firm. 3 days, Dorothy. He hasn't even been gone 3 days." "You're lucky we didn't change the locks sooner," came a deeper voice. Chase Carter, Brian's older brother. Chase was in his late 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, always in polished shoes and tailored suits. His blonde hair was perfectly combed, even in the rain. He didn't look like a man in mourning. He looked like a man who had waited too long for this moment. He stepped beside his mother, adjusting his cufflinks. "Brian made some poor choices. There's nothing left. The trust is gone. The estate belongs to the Carter name, not the widow of a failed entrepreneur." Rachel clenched her fists. "He was your brother." Chase shrugged. "And he married someone who didn't understand how this family works." A low whimper came from behind the SUV. Rachel turned just in time to see Bear step cautiously from the side of the vehicle. The German Shepherd's coat was a mottled mix of sable and black, with a soft graying around his muzzle. He was 6 years old, heavy-set, but limping slightly on his front leg, a souvenir from the car accident that had left Brian pinned beneath a burning dashboard. But what made Bear truly unforgettable was the soft brown blindfold tied around his eyes. It was made of repurposed silk from one of Brian's old ties, Rachel had sewn it herself. Bear had gone blind after the accident, but he had never stopped moving toward Rachel's voice, toward the children, toward the door, even now, as if he still believed this was home. "Keep that beast away from the kids," Chase spat. "You know blind dogs are dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Lily said defiantly, opening the car door and stepping out. "He's our dog." "Get back inside, sweetheart," Rachel said gently, guiding Lily back in before she turned to Chase. "You don't get to insult him. He saved Brian's life. He was part of this family long before you decided to play God with Brian's will." "There is no will," Dorothy snapped. "Brian never updated anything. Everything reverts to the Carter Trust. You were never really part of it, just a placeholder." That word, placeholder, hit Rachel harder than she expected. As if the years she had spent holding Brian's hand through chemo, through surgeries, through those final nights, had meant nothing. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned and closed the trunk. Bear, as if sensing the moment, circled around to the passenger side and waited. Rachel opened the door for him, and the blind dog jumped in without hesitation. As the SUV pulled away from the estate, the rain thickened, dancing against the windshield like restless fingers. The mansion faded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by fog. They drove in silence for a while. Logan finally spoke, barely a whisper. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Rachel swallowed. "Somewhere safe, baby." The trailer was a rusted thing at the edge of Havenwood, sitting beneath a crooked pine and surrounded by overgrown weeds. But it had heat, water, and space enough for 3 beds and a dog. Rachel parked beside it and stepped out into the gravel, rain still drizzling like a lullaby from a sorrowful sky. As she carried boxes inside and set up blankets for the twins, Bear curled near the door, his ears twitching occasionally at the sound of their voices. He never barked. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. That night, as the children finally fell asleep, Logan clutching his rabbit, Lily curled against Bear's side. Rachel sat alone at the tiny kitchen table, staring out at the rain. She thought of Brian's last words, whispered through labored breath just before the morphine took him. "If anything happens to me, Bear knows. And Vincent? Find Vincent." Rachel's brows furrowed. She didn't know who Vincent was. A friend? A lawyer? A hallucination? But Bear's ears twitched then, as if he had heard the name, as if he remembered. The morning after their exile was quiet, almost too quiet. Mist rolled in from the sea and wrapped Havenwood in a silvery hush, softening the edges of every sound. The trailer sat perched near a bend in the coastal cliffs, where the scent of salt mingled with pine needles and the crackling chill of a November wind. The sunrise barely managed to break through the clouds, its light pale and diffused, like a promise not quite kept. Rachel Carter stirred slowly, wrapped in a faded quilt at the small dinette table where she had fallen asleep the night before. Her face was marked by the creases of exhaustion, but her eyes blinked open with a sharp clarity. Last night's memory struck her like a whisper across the mind. Brian's final words, "Bear knows," and Vincent. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the twins still bundled together on the pull-out bed. Bear lay at the door, his ears twitching now and then, blindfold still wrapped gently over his eyes. Though he could no longer see, he always seemed to sense Rachel's movement, his large head tilting just slightly as she moved past him. She reached for her phone and opened the contact list, scrolling until she found a number saved under Brian's work, urgent. Her fingers hovered for a moment before tapping it. It rang once, twice. Then, "Rachel?" A man's voice, deep and tinged with surprise, came through the speaker. "It's Vincent." Vincent Miller had once been Brian's closest friend, a former corporate attorney turned independent financial advisor. When Brian was diagnosed, it was Vincent who helped restructure his business holdings and quietly pull away from the grasp of the Carter family's influence. Rachel had met him only twice in person, both times brief, cordial, and wrapped in corporate talk. But something about his voice now felt familiar, even safe. "I think," Rachel's voice trembled, "I think Brian wanted you to help us." There was a pause, a shifting of papers, or perhaps footsteps. "Where are you?" Vincent asked. Rachel hesitated. "Outside Havenwood, in the trailer near Fisher's Bluff." I'll be there in 2 hours. True to his word, just over 2 hours later, a silver sedan pulled up along the gravel road beside the trailer. Vincent Miller stepped out, tall and sharp-shouldered in a wool coat, the color of storm clouds. He was in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with short salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more professor than lawyer. His eyes, though tired, still carried an alertness that came from years of reading contracts others barely understood. Rachel opened the door before he could knock. Bear, seated at her feet, lifted his head at the scent and gave a low, approving hum. "He remembers you," Rachel said, a trace of relief in her voice. Vincent smiled and knelt down, placing a hand gently on Bear's neck. "So do I." Inside, over warm coffee and muffled cartoons, "Playing for the twins," Vincent explained. "Brian never trusted Dorothy or Chase, especially near the end. He told me once, if anything happened to him, to wait exactly 1 week after the funeral before reaching out to you." Vincent pulled a folded document from his satchel, worn at the edges, thick with weight. "This is his real will, signed, notarized, witnessed, everything legal. It names you and the twins as sole heirs to all private assets, including a trust worth approximately $200 million. Rachel sat stunned, her hand frozen around her coffee mug. "But the Carter estate claimed it was broke," she whispered. Vincent nodded. "Because Dorothy and Chase funneled everything into offshore holdings months before Brian passed. What's worse," he leaned closer, lowering his voice, "they used Brian's cancer treatments as a cover to liquidate his remaining shares and erase the financial trail. But Brian was smarter than them. He left proof, and from what he told me, it's somewhere near here." Bear suddenly lifted his head and let out a soft whine. Then he stood and padded, slowly but with purpose, toward the side door that led to the old garage attached to the trailer by a sagging plank of wood. Rachel followed, Vincent just behind. The garage smelled of oil, damp earth, and forgotten tools. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling and the corners of unused shelves. In the far left corner, Bear stopped and began to scratch, not frantically, but deliberately, at a patch of rotted floorboard beneath a stack of rusted toolboxes. Rachel pushed the boxes aside. Vincent found a crowbar. Together, they pried the boards loose to reveal a wooden chest, faded and cracked, but still solid. There were initials carved into the top. B.C. Rachel's breath hitched. They opened it slowly. Inside were 3 items: a leather-bound journal, an old cassette recorder with several labeled tapes, and a thin manila folder stuffed with printouts, signatures, and bank statements. Vincent took the folder and skimmed through it quickly, his brow tightening. "This is it," he muttered. "This is everything." Rachel picked up the journal and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was Brian's. She would know it anywhere. Notes, dates, reflections, questions, and calculations filled the margins, and several entries directly named Dorothy, accusing her of forging signatures, redirecting trust payments, and even tampering with Brian's business records while he was in the hospital. The tapes were labeled by month. Brian had recorded everything. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, the chest still open beside her. "You were right," she said aloud, to no one in particular. Behind her, Bear lay down next to the chest and placed his head gently against its side. Lily wandered into the doorway and watched for a moment before walking slowly over to Bear. "Watch this," she whispered. Rachel turned. Lily knelt beside Bear and touched her fingers to her own lips, then pressed them gently to Bear's ear. The dog's head tilted. Then she stroked his ear softly, a slow back-and-forth motion. "Can you hear me now?" she whispered. Bear gave a small whine and leaned into her hand. "She's been doing this since yesterday," Rachel whispered to Vincent. "I thought it was just pretend." Vincent watched quietly, something close to awe in his expression. Number, that's pattern recognition. She's teaching him to associate touch with tone, like a new kind of language. Lily giggled as Bear nuzzled her shoulder. "He understands." Rachel sat down next to them, the journal still in her lap, and looked at her daughter. "So do I," she whispered. The rain had returned to Havenwood with a quiet persistence, like a secret knocking at every window of the old trailer. The sky hung low and damp, casting everything in a pale gray light that blurred the edges of the world. Inside, the silence was deeper than usual. Rachel Carter stood at the sink, drying dishes with distracted hands while her mind raced. The email she had received that morning still flashed in her thoughts. A formal lawsuit filed by Dorothy Carter and Chase Carter, her late husband's mother and brother. The words were cold, clinical, and full of venom. Accusations of forgery, of manipulating a dying man into changing his will, of neglecting the very children she had fought tooth and nail to protect. In the background, Vincent Miller sat at the dinette, reading the document line by line. His glasses were perched low on his nose, brows furrowed. "They're coming hard, Rachel," he said finally, "accusing you of identity fraud, financial coercion, and worse, unfit parenting. This isn't just about the money. They want the children too." Rachel turned slowly. Her face was pale but composed. "And Bear?" Vincent hesitated, then pointed to a section further down the document. "They filed an injunction to have him removed. They're labeling him a danger to minors due to his blindness and size. They claim you're putting the kids at risk by keeping a disabled, unpredictable animal in the home." Rachel's voice caught in her throat. "He's never hurt anyone. They're not trying to prove he did, just that he might." Bear, lying near the front door with his brown blindfold slightly wrinkled from sleep, lifted his head at the sound of her voice. He didn't move toward her. He never did when uncertain, but his ears flicked with the familiar cue of tension. As if he understood the storm now growing outside had nothing to do with weather. Just then, the front door creaked. A soft knock followed. Rachel opened it to find two strangers standing in the cold. A uniformed woman in her 50s, tall and composed, with graying hair tucked under a cap, and beside her, a man in a dark green coat holding a leash. "Ms. Carter?" the woman asked. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes. My name is Officer Dana Wells, Havenwood Animal Services. This is my partner, Mark Dugan." She glanced at the clipboard in her hand, then looked Rachel in the eye. "We have a signed order for temporary animal removal, pending investigation." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Number. This must be a mistake. Bear is part of this family. He's—" "I understand," Dana said gently. "But until the hearing is complete, the court is mandating observation at the municipal shelter. We're just here to follow the order, not to pass judgment." Bear did not resist. When Rachel knelt to place her arms around his neck, the German shepherd leaned into her, pressing his head gently to her shoulder. Logan stood a few feet away, clutching a folded piece of paper and watching the scene with unreadable eyes. As Bear was led away, blindfold still tied neatly behind his ears, Rachel turned back inside and closed the door slowly. A quiet had settled over the trailer, not the kind that brought peace, but the kind that followed a loss. Vincent stood. "They've planned this too well." Rachel shook her head. "They want to break me down, one piece at a time." Later that evening, Logan sat cross-legged on the floor by the heater, colored pencils scattered around him. He hadn't said a word since Bear was taken. Rachel, curled on the couch with a mug of tea gone cold, watched him quietly. Lily had long since fallen asleep. Vincent sat at the table, thumbing through legal forms, but his eyes occasionally flicking toward Logan. "What's he drawing?" he asked softly. Rachel shook her head. "He doesn't show me until he's done. Sometimes I think it's how he speaks." Minutes passed. Logan finally stood and carried over a sheet of paper. He handed it to Vincent without a word. On the page was a sketch, childlike but detailed, of a tall man with no face. Beside him stood a large dog, blindfolded, positioned in front of a tall iron gate beneath a cloudy sky. In the background was a structure, oddly shaped, with a roof that curved like a crooked tooth and small barred windows. Vincent blinked. "This isn't random?" Rachel looked over his shoulder. "What do you mean?" "I've seen buildings like this before. Not here, but in some of Brian's older files. Safe houses, storage locations, places off the grid." Rachel frowned. "You think Brian took Logan there?" Vincent looked at the boy. "Maybe not just once. Maybe enough times for him to remember the shape of it." Logan stepped closer, reaching for another drawing. This one showed the inside of the building, a small room, dimly lit, with what appeared to be a locked cabinet, a low bench, and, strangely, something that looked like a file folder resting on a stool. "He's remembering something," Vincent said. "Something Brian showed him." something he's not quite ready to say with words. Rachel exhaled. Do you think it could be connected to the will? Vincent's voice dropped. I think it could be where the final piece is hidden. They stared at the drawings in silence. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere, perhaps in a cold kennel under fluorescent lights, Bear waited, still guarding something even the law could not take away. The storm had passed, but the air in Havenwood remained dense with tension. It had been 2 days since Bear was taken, and each minute felt stretched, fragile, as if time itself held its breath. In the trailer, Logan had grown even quieter, while Lily had stopped asking when Bear would come home. She simply began sleeping with his old blanket curled around her head like a second skin. Rachel Carter sat across from Vincent Miller in the cramped dinette, eyes locked on the screen of his laptop. Vincent's face was stoic, but his eyes gleamed with purpose behind silver-framed glasses. His fingers moved swiftly, pulling up financial records, cross-referencing email chains, and matching time-stamped transactions to internal Carter Foundation spreadsheets. There, he said finally, turning the screen toward Rachel. On display was a wire transfer, $250,000, moved from the Brian Carter Memorial Scholarship Fund to a personal account under the name Chase Allen Carter. The transaction had been disguised through a charitable holding company registered in Nevada, but Vincent's digging had peeled back the layers. Rachel stared. They said everything went to Brian's treatments. Vincent nodded grimly. That was the cover story. But this transfer happened 5 weeks before Brian passed, right when he was barely conscious. He sat back in the chair, exhaustion tugging at the corners of his eyes. This is what we need: financial misconduct, embezzlement from a memorial fund. If we play this right, we flip the narrative. They came after you. Now we go after them. Rachel stood, pacing, her arms folded across her chest. And Bear? Vincent hesitated. That part is harder. We'll have to file a counter-motion, but it could take days, weeks even. The system moves slow. But Rachel wasn't listening anymore. She had walked to the corner of the room where Lily sat on the floor with one of Bear's toys clutched to her chest, a stuffed fox with a missing ear. The little girl looked up with solemn eyes, then down at the drawing she'd been working on. It was Bear, of course, standing at a door shaped like a crooked arch. Rachel crouched. Lily, she whispered, if we went to visit Bear, just visit, would you come with me? Lily nodded without hesitation. That evening, after dark, Rachel parked her aging SUV 2 blocks from the Havenwood Animal Holding Facility. The air smelled of damp concrete and wet pine. The wind had teeth again. Lily was bundled in a puffy blue coat and wool hat, her mittened hands wrapped tightly around Rachel's fingers. Vincent had protested. This was not part of any legal strategy. But Rachel had made her choice. They crept along the back alley where the facility's exterior fence ended. A narrow path led to the staff exit. Rachel had spent the afternoon watching the security guards' routines and discovered the midnight shift changed over with a 20-minute. A window, enough for what they had to do. A single bolt cutter clip, and they were in. Bear's kennel was near the end of the corridor, separated from the others. As they approached, Rachel heard it. A faint shuffle, a low, muffled whimper. She unlatched the door. Bear stood slowly, unsure, then raised his head. His blindfold was still in place. But the moment Rachel whispered, "Come here, boy," he moved forward, guided by her scent. He pressed his body against her, shaking slightly. "It's time to come home," she whispered. Lily hugged his neck, and Bear let out a deep, hushed breath that sounded like gratitude. They didn't go back to the trailer. Bear led them somewhere else. It started as a gentle tug, a shift in posture. Vincent had met them near the car, reluctantly agreeing to help conceal the escape. But when Bear turned, ears forward, body aligned northward, Vincent frowned. "He wants to go somewhere," he muttered. They followed him, first by car, then on foot. Bear moved with strange certainty, despite his blindness. The path he led them through wound along the old forest trail outside the original Carter estate, past the overgrown orchards and up toward the bluff where the guest house had once stood. It was burned down now. Just a foundation and a few collapsed beams remained. But Bear stopped there. He sniffed, stepped forward, and began pawing at the ground just behind a stone bench half covered in ivy. Rachel knelt beside him, brushing back leaves and dirt. A metal handle, rusted, recessed into stone. Vincent joined her, and together they pulled. The hatch groaned open with ancient protest, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. Bear stepped down first. The basement was cold, still. The air smelled of dust and mildew, but also of memory. Rachel held a flashlight while Vincent examined the room. There was a desk in the corner, a filing cabinet with broken drawers, and on the far wall, a mounted television and a small shelf of labeled tapes. Vincent moved quickly, pulling down the boxes marked with dates and subjects. One read, "Trust Meetings, Spring," another, "Private for Rachel." They played the last one. The screen flickered. Brian appeared, thin, pale, but alert. He sat at the desk they now stood beside, his face drawn but clear. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm gone, and they're coming for you." Rachel clutched Lily's hand tightly. Brian continued, "My family's greed knows no bottom. They will say you manipulated me. They will fight to keep the fortune for themselves. But everything, every last cent, belongs to you, Rachel. To Lily. To Logan. Not because of law, but because of love." He paused. His eyes glistened. "And Bear, if he led you here, it means he remembered. Even without sight, he remembered. He's the last gatekeeper, my compass. Yours now, too." The screen went black. No one spoke for a long time. Then Vincent broke the silence. "We have the recordings, the money trail." And now, Brian's voice. Rachel turned to Bear. He lay at the foot of the stairs, calm, unmoving, like a sentry guarding a secret he had finally revealed. The courthouse in Portland loomed with solemn grace, its columns like watchful eyes over the crowd gathered on the damp steps. The sky was a soft ash gray, muted but no longer angry, as if the storm that had chased the Carter family for months had finally begun to clear. Inside the main courtroom, polished wood gleamed under overhead lights, and a quiet hush settled like a held breath. The gallery was half full, buzzing with quiet curiosity. Whispers trailed through the benches as Rachel Carter entered. She wore a navy dress that had once belonged to her sister, her posture straight, her jaw firm. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly, and her green eyes, red-rimmed but unwavering, carried the sharpness of a woman who had finally stopped running. Vincent Miller walked beside her, holding the briefcase that contained months of truth. Dorothy Carter sat at the plaintiff's table in a tailored black suit, her perfectly applied lipstick cracking at the corners. The air around her felt brittle. Her once proud posture drooped slightly, and though she wore pearls, they clashed now against the weight of exposed deceit. Next to her sat Angela Frey, the high-powered attorney with piercing eyes and a clipped tone, flipping through documents with controlled fury. And on the far end, Chase Carter, in a charcoal suit that couldn't hide the nervous twitch of his knee. His once groomed hair was slightly unkempt. The arrogance he wore like armor had begun to rust. Judge Marilyn Carr, a woman in her early 60s with a shock of silver curls and an expression like granite, presided over the bench. She had a reputation for fairness, not warmth. But today her gaze lingered longer than usual on the children in the front row, Lily and Logan, seated beside a social worker. "We are here today," Judge Carr began, her voice crisp, "to determine legal heirship, guardianship, and address pending criminal allegations regarding the Carter estate and foundation. Ms. Carter, your counsel may proceed." Vincent stood and moved to the center of the courtroom. Unlike most lawyers, he didn't raise his voice. His words were like carefully placed stones, measured, deliberate, unshakable. "Your Honor, the defense submits into evidence a series of financial records, dated journal entries, and, most importantly, a recorded video of Brian Carter, made weeks before his passing, declaring his intentions regarding his estate, his family, and his children." Angela Frey objected, but Judge Carr raised a hand. "Let's see the evidence." Vincent connected the flash drive. The courtroom darkened slightly as the screen flickered on. Brian's face appeared, thin, weary, but unmistakably lucid. "If you're seeing this," he began, "then my worst fears were right. My family has betrayed the very legacy we were meant to protect." He looked into the camera. "My wife, Rachel Carter, is the mother of my children, the love of my life, and the only person I trust to continue what I started. I name her sole heir of my personal and business assets. To Lily and Logan, this is your future. To Bear, if you found this old friend, thank you for keeping them safe." The screen went black. Silence blanketed the room like fresh snow. Judge Carr cleared her throat. "Ms. Frey?" Angela stood, attempted to discredit the video as fabricated sentiment, but Vincent was ready. He handed over notarized logs, timestamps, voice authentication reports. Then came the financial documents, ledgers showing Chase Carter's laundering of scholarship funds, wire transfers to offshore accounts, and falsified reports signed by Dorothy. And finally, the nail in the coffin, a signed board meeting summary with Dorothy's initials approving the misuse of memorial donations. Dorothy's shoulders slumped. Chase buried his face in his hands. The gavel came down like thunder. This court recognizes Rachel Carter as the lawful heir to the Carter estate, full legal guardian of Lily and Logan Carter, and finds sufficient evidence for the arrest of Mr. Chase Carter on charges of embezzlement and money laundering. 2 officers appeared beside Chase. He didn't resist. Judge Carr looked down once more. "The injunction against Ms. Carter's dog is void. Bear is to be returned to her care immediately." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. As the courtroom emptied, Dorothy remained frozen in her seat, a statue of a matriarch undone by truth. Weeks later, Havenwood bloomed with spring. The trailer was gone, replaced now by a cottage on the edge of the bluff, its windows open to salt air and laughter. Where once there had been shadows, now there was light, and in the field behind the cottage, a modest wooden sign stood, freshly painted. The Gatehouse, Center for Legal and Animal Recovery. It was Rachel's vision, born from scars. A small nonprofit legal center that offered pro bono legal help for women facing coercion or property abuse. Next door, a fenced area with a cozy barn now housed injured or abandoned animals. Lily helped feed the goats. Logan read stories to the rabbits. Bear lay under a tree in the yard, his sable fur catching streaks of sun, his brown blindfold slightly faded. Though blind, he seemed to know when children approached. He always raised his head just slightly, offering stillness and warmth to those who needed it. One of those children was Elena Vasquez, an 8-year-old foster girl with PTSD who hadn't spoken in months. Elena had long, frizzy black hair and eyes that flinched at sudden movement. She didn't speak to adults, but she would sit beside Bear, legs tucked beneath her, pressing her small palm to his shoulder. Rachel watched from the porch with quiet gratitude. That evening, golden light stretched across the field as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs. Lily and Logan ran through the grass, giggling, tossing, wildflowers in the air. Bear sat beneath a tree, his head tilted toward the laughter, his ears twitching softly at each burst of joy. Rachel sat on the porch swing with Vincent beside her. The wind curled around them, smelling of salt and rain. "You did it," Vincent said. "No," Rachel replied. "We all did." She looked out across the field at the children and the blind dog who had led her through the darkest gate of her life and back into the light. Home wasn't a building. It wasn't a courtroom ruling. It was this: laughter in the air, justice done. And Bear, always watching, even without sight, guarding not just what had been lost, but everything they had found again. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come in flashing lights or thunder from the sky. Sometimes they come in the form of a blind dog who never gave up, a mother who refused to be broken, or a child's quiet drawing that led the way. What Rachel, Bear, and the children found was more than justice. It was redemption, grace, and a new beginning. And through it all, one truth remained clear. Even in our darkest valleys, God is still working. If you've ever felt forgotten, mistreated, or pushed aside, remember this story. Miracles still happen. Often in silence, often through love, and always with divine timing. God can use the broken to build something beautiful. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below what part touched you the most. Type Amen if you believe God still moves through ordinary people, animals, and quiet acts of faith. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of love, resilience, and God's quiet miracles. May God bless you and everyone you love.